Thank you and good afternoon. Well, first, thank you for spending Friday afternoon here. I know it's day 3 of the conference. A lot of overseas friends will probably take advantage of the sun and gone out to downtown Auckland. So thank you for showing up first. I go back to what I think the minister said on Wednesday. I think one of the things that Stephen Joyce talked about is looking at Asia and growth of Asia. We'd be delighted in the next 30-40 minutes to share with you some of the work that I've been doing in Singapore. Maybe first a couple of words about my background. I started for the first 10 years of my career as an organization psychologist in the Singapore Armed Forces, looking at leadership selection and work and stuff like that. And then transited to the private sector in probably spent 12-13 years in consulting in the HR space. And then an interesting period of time working within corporates, family-owned corporates, and I think in New Zealand there are lots of family-owned businesses, but these are huge Asian corporates into shipping, into palm oil, pulp paper. But for me, probably the most interesting stint I ever did in my career was 3 years ago when I had the opportunity and invited by the Singapore government to start something called the Human Capital Leadership Institute. If you think of Singapore, where Singapore has always come from, pretty much having no natural resources, but taking advantage of its geography, location, infrastructure, and so on. Historically, it's been attracting investment into Singapore by what we all call the Fortune 500 companies, manufacturing, electronics, R&D, and so on. But in recent years, there's been a lot of talk within Singapore as a government, how do we position Singapore as the hub to understand leadership in Asia? And to Peter's point earlier, we probably today realize that it's not enough being written research and understood about how to lead in Asia. 95, maybe 99% of the literature we buy in the bookstore is from the US. And ever since the global financial crisis, lots have been written about failures of leadership. And increasingly, with Asia coming up from an economic standpoint, and I think lots of statistics about the growth of the middle class, consumption patterns, to a large extent, Asia has stopped being just a production factory for the world, being a huge market potential for us to sell services and goods into. The question therein lies for businesses that are expanding, starting to grow in Asia, how much do we know of the landscape? The second question then we have to ask ourselves is, as we may be out of Australia, New Zealand, or US, or Europe, as we expand into Asia, how do we do it from a leadership standpoint? Do we do what the US did 20 years ago and ship our best local managers into Asia? The expatriate syndrome, and hoping that they will do the same thing and do it well. Increasingly, we see that approach probably is not very successful. In the past, it might still work because you're basically bringing your technology, your production into a low-cost base, doing the same thing and selling it back to your home country. But today, if you really want to leverage on the Asian consumption, the middle income and the growth sector, you probably need to understand the psyche of the consumers in market. So therein lies the question, how do we bridge the gap between market potential that Asia offers and the leadership and human capital that you want to lead your business as you grow in the area? So that's pretty much the history and the background to why Human Capital Leadership Institute was created. So I just had the privilege to start this 3 years ago. And 2 weeks ago, I left the institute and relocated to Auckland for family reasons. But when I left 2 weeks ago, we grew to an institute of about 34 people. We've got a cadre of about 5 ex-PhDs, academics who are now doing research in the whole space of leadership. And I think for me, I think for all of us, we know, I'm sure many of you have traveled, worked across Asia. Asia is not Asia. India is not China. Got some of my friends from Tata in India, and I think India and China are diametrically opposite from a cultural standpoint. And everything in between, in your ASEAN region and your China, together they present a huge potential market. India is 1 billion, China 1.3, ASEAN is a region is 800 million. So potentially huge market growth. Now, some of the things I'd like to share with you over the next 30-40 minutes is, as we started doing some of this work in Asia, what is it that we think we have probably distilled and give back to the business? I I call it practices and paradoxes because to a large extent, we believe that the American model of global leadership probably doesn't work anymore. And inherently, some of the practices that we see being effective in Asia, as you talk about leadership development, intuitively actually runs contrary to what some of us think is effective leadership. So I'll share some research with you in a short while. Well, I won't belabor this point, but I mentioned earlier we have three teams, one that drives research, one that looks at leadership development, that's the executive development piece. And the third piece, I think Peter probably alluded to that too, that one of the big agenda to setting this up is to create a platform for thought leaders and practitioners to come and share knowledge. And that's true a lot of networking platforms. It could be as intimate as 10, 15 CEO roundtables. It could be a 600, 700 annual conference that we run in leadership every year. I just want to re-emphasize, probably reinforce, that when the Singapore government set this up, it was never meant to be an academic setup. And so they brought together a couple of pretty senior business leaders to be board members of the Institute. And just to highlight a couple of people here, maybe I should start with a gentleman, who is the MD and CEO of Tata Communications from an Indian standpoint. We have Unilever, top right corner, who's the Chief Operating Officer, the number 2 man in Unilever, based in Singapore. He sits on the board. Bottom right, I don't have a photo. We have the CEO of Mitsui, one of the biggest, largest Japanese corporate office. They have the headquarters in Singapore, outside of Japan as well. And a host of other business and academic government leaders. Now, what the board does, obviously, keeps us very grounded on the work we do. It has to be relevant to businesses. I'll skip this. What I'd like to do next is actually to kind of set the scene for the research I want to speak about, is for those of us who may not be too into the Asian market, just to give you a quick lay of the land on what Asia looks like from a human capital standpoint. Maybe before I go into this, can I get a quick show of hands? How many of you have operations in Asia? Oh. What about plans to expand into Asia? Those of you that are not there just yet. But I think by default we all see that Asia presents huge opportunities to grow. But the question then is, at the same time, if you look at this chart, which is a recent survey done by the AIU, Economist Intelligence Unit, while Asia presents huge opportunities, it also has huge risks of doing business. Especially for those of us who have traveled and worked in some of the countries, Indonesia, China, Vietnam, sometimes not publicly talked about corruption issues, protection of intellectual property. How do you understand the role of governments in business? Many of these things are not taught in MBA schools and leadership programs. And so if you think about getting your leaders prepared to lead in different parts of Asia, where are they going to go to understand some of the complexities of operating in Asia? Because if you don't do it well, and we have lots of examples of companies that have seen the potential, tried to go in, and lost a lot of money in Asia. So again, for me personally, the whole family here, I'm very interested to see how I can work with some of the local companies here from New Zealand into Asia. That's a separate conversation. So if we look at this chart, yes, huge opportunity, huge risk. How do we mitigate those risks? Gentlemen up there, you're not supposed to answer this question. My friends from Tata. Make a guess. I got a couple of these just to keep us awake after lunch.
1 million.
1 million? Any other takers?
100.
Okay. Huge. But let's look at the following question. Specific to India, how many % of graduates do you think that they churn out are unemployable? Unemployable simply means the minute they leave university, you're really just not ready for the workforce. That means you need another whole stint of training to get them ready. How many % do you think? 60? Any others? 20, 40, 80? Yeah, more than. Now, if you start thinking about the implications for your businesses And it's probably a sad fact that not just India, but many universities across many parts of Asia are probably have not caught up with what business requirements need in terms of generating graduates. Lots have also been written about the death of the MBA. The MBA schools leading up to the global financial crisis was still doing pretty well. But a lot of MBA graduates today are talking about social responsibility, joining companies that is just beyond, it's more than just making money. So, huge implications from a human capital standpoint. What about this? These are facts, you can't overturn this sort of trends overnight, right? If you look at China one-child policy. What do you think the number is? Oh, well done. But it's got huge implications. If you think about China, yeah, obviously they're still doing what, 7.5% growth. But at some point, the bubble will burst. Interesting statistics. The average age of the Chinese CEO today, I think, is 36 years old. I think in America it's 54. So you think about this, the speed that China has grown, many senior executives are there simply because they've been fast-tracked out. And you think of where Chinese companies, the global Chinese companies are heading now, they're buying up companies in the rest of the world. But from a leadership and human capital standpoint, probably still very, very young in terms of immature in its thinking. I think those of you who are from here, you all know that higher is what pushing higher. So think about the potential challenge of integrating a company like that. I think Rod Oram gave a pretty pessimistic view that, yeah, when they buy you, they say, well, we'll keep everything, the brand, the people, leadership, but within 2-3 years, Chinese will take over. You probably know the car brand Volvo. Do you know it's owned by a Chinese company? It's owned by a company called Geely, which many of you probably have never heard of. Land Rover, Jaguar, do you know who owns it? Tata. Tata, it's a conglomerate that's bought Land Rover.
Is it more reliable?
I won't answer that, but my friends from Tata. Well, the point is, I think it's irreversible, at least for the next 10-20 years, the growth of Asia. And as Asian corporates start buying up the rest of the world, they're probably facing similar leadership challenges as what the US faced in terms of shipping and expansion. And continually we hear of, for example, Chinese companies shipping the best Chinese managers into an acquired company in a more Western market, facing very similar challenges. So the question for us is, whether you're moving east to west or west to east, challenges will surface. Think about Japan, which is yet another very interesting geography. What do you think the number is?
It's in the negative, isn't it? They're in the negative, right?
Yeah. They're going through a huge. You may have read some of the recent business news about companies like Sharp, Panasonic. The amount of money that's lost in the last 12 months is probably more than the GDP of some countries. If you think about where Japanese brands are today, consumer goods, for example, have been overtaken by LG and Samsung, mobile phones, television. So these are serious issues facing different pockets of markets in Asia. Interesting for us, or for me, before I left the Institute 2 weeks ago, was we started doing a lot more work to help Japanese companies develop leaders, doing programs in Singapore, in English. Now that's a first for many Japanese companies. If you know Japanese companies historically, all leaders go to Japan for training. And if you are an upcoming MBA graduate, you probably decide or think 3-4 times before you join a Japanese company, because of the glass ceiling, especially if you don't speak the language. Today, I think many Japanese companies realize that if they continue on that track, it's just going to go downhill all the way. So already, I think some change is happening in that direction. So in short, what we're seeing is, Asia has huge potential, huge numbers, huge quantity, not a lot of quality, not a lot of skilled workforce, especially at the more high-tech level, which is made a lot worse by what schools are teaching and producing. We looked at the India statistics, and my friends here can attest to that. The fact that Tata has a leadership training center that puts fresh graduates through 6 to 9 months training program out of university before they're even employable is testimony to that. So, Tata, Infosys, Wipro, a lot of the big Indian IT companies all have campuses. China is starting to do that now. So, huge human capital leadership education. It's probably not helped by the fact that a lot of education system in mainstream East Asia, Japan, Hong Kong, China, Korea, Singapore, schools are still very academic driven, grades, exams, and all that. So that's on the left part. But if you think about what business requires today, the speed of change, complexity, the volatility, the sort of matrix structure. For me, it's interesting is we see our kids grow up in technology edge, where communication is done through smartphones, just through whatever, Twitter, Facebook. How are these people going to lead real people when they enter the workforce? It's something that I think for us in Asia especially, we're grappling with. If you look at how our 18, 20-year-olds are being taught and how technology works in this space, when you put them into real teams to work, many of them find this huge challenge because they're not used to relating to real people. It's all done through technology. But when you have real issues at work, you can't solve them by emails. So we see this sort of things happening very much. So on the right side of this, if this is what companies require, we see a huge gap in terms of what education systems require. So just to quickly sum up, these are some of the trends we see in Asia. Huge employability gaps, aging society, which is not helped by the low birth rates we see in many of the developed countries. Then change tack a little bit, and in the interest of time, because I could go on and talk about this for hours. Let's talk about leadership in Asia. What's so unique and what's different? As Peter mentioned in the introduction, we believe the US way of global leadership, one size fits all, don't work anymore, especially in many parts of Asia. I think there's still a lot of best practices we can learn from big name companies from the US, but all these probably needs to be tweaked in order for them to be effective in Asia. So let me turn this back to you. If you look at this picture, who do you think is the leader? Last one. Last one on the left. Why would you say that, sir?
Because he can do more of his team.
Okay. Any other options?
They all move at once.
Well, don't give me this three-dimensional thing. This angle, this angle.
I'll try to catch him.
Any other options? Why the middle one? Protected. So if danger comes, the leaders are the last to be hurt. Anyone says it's the front one? No? Leaders don't lead from the front anymore? Is that what we're saying?
I was saying none.
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 So no leader, you just follow the
They
crowd.
all look the same.
All depending on the situation.
Okay, so we're talking about situation whether you lead from front. Well, this was a piece of research done across 3 universities, one in Hong Kong, one in Singapore, one in Chicago. And so they show the same picture to groups of executives, obviously in the 3 countries, Singapore, Hong Kong, and the US. It probably wouldn't surprise you that 9 out of 10 senior executives in the US says this is that one. I don't know what you want to call it, a hero CEO concept in the US. Every CEO is an icon. It's like the Steve Jobs. Every company, the ego is so big.
We got the story of the buffalo, the wind buffalo.
Yeah.
some initiation of some sort.
CEO takes all the credit for all the good things, and when something goes wrong, he gets a big payout, he goes and joins another company. It just goes on, right? But obviously, the findings in Asia is a little bit more mixed. A big part of the respondents says the one in the middle, because you know, in the Chinese emperor concept is surrounded by all his consorts and whatnot, advisors, so possibly. And also a lot of the people say it's from the back, because in the Asian concept, the leader leads from the back, and some leader guiding, mentor, kind of thing. Now you can debate what's right or wrong, and to your point, it's also situational. But what's interesting is it's no more just leading from the front, and the point I want to make here is if we continue to measure effective leaders through what the typical American model of leadership is, someone needs to be highly articulate, a lot of what you might call the song and dance type, you know, be able to stand up and be a total articulate communicator, but probably doesn't do very much beyond that. It doesn't really, if we continue to look at leadership through that lens, I think we're missing out on a lot of high potential coming up from Asia. And I go back to the point I made earlier, why do we even bother discussing this? And my point is, for you to be able to tap on the growth of Asia, you truly need leaders who understand the market, not just going in there and just talk about ambition, vision, mission, and all those great things, but not really understanding what's required by the market. So I pulled out two quotes, and you know, one is a Chinese philosopher, very much, if you understand the East Asian Confucian way of doing things, it's very much about the group, which is very different from North American view of leaders. You think about the military, you know, thousands of years ago, it's all about lead by example, lead from the front. It's also interesting because if you look at the Israeli army, they have this strong belief that leaders need to lead from the front. But after many wars, and been through many, continue to go through more, you realize that a lot of the leaders was the first one to get killed. Because the sniper would just pick out the front one, and that's the leader. So now they've also changed from a military standpoint that leaders, not the front person, is somewhere 1 or 2 bounds behind. So I guess the question for us is, you know, effective leadership means different things in different markets. We're not talking about you leading your own people in the country that you grew up in, because you could be the most effective leader in your own country. But when you move into a different market that culturally is different, that has different issues and way of doing business, and especially when you have to lead local teams, then you probably need to appreciate where you're coming from and where they are coming from, because without doing that, you scope for trouble. I want to leave you with the last piece of research, and hopefully there's time for questions. And I call this paradoxes, because the research I want to talk about, there are probably some leadership concepts that are not so intuitive. And this, I'll show you what I mean by that. A year ago, HCLI did a joint research project with the Center for Creative Leadership. I don't know how many of you have heard of CCL. They're a North American-based company, very much in the leadership consulting space, with I think a pretty wide presence across Asia and Europe. And we looked at top-performing leaders in companies in Asia. And the mixture of Western multinationals and Asian companies. Unilever was one of the companies that participated in this. So what we did was we interviewed the top performers. Top performers typically would be probably direct reports to the CEO. We interviewed the CEOs, interviewed the head of HR, we interviewed their peers. Really trying to find out what is it that has made them got to where they are. What are some of the lessons learned? And in short, the whole concept of how do we develop, how do we fast-track leadership development in Asia? And I think Asia presents different challenges for leadership development simply because of the economics. Asia is probably the only region in the world today as a region that can still show double-digit growth. In North America, Europe, that's pretty flat, if not negative. With the speed of growth, what we're seeing from a leadership standpoint is, gone are the days that you move someone into a bigger job when you think they're 100% ready. If you do that, chances are your high potential is not going to be with you much longer. Because if you don't give the person the opportunity when he or she is maybe 60% ready, someone else will. And so with the sort of job market we're seeing, especially in countries like India and China, simply driven by growth, you have pretty young executives being fast-tracked quickly through the career track. And it presents different issues and challenges because first, if you don't train them, if you don't give them the challenge, someone else will for 30% more money, so you're going to lose high potential. So you can't just accept the fact that you're not going to do it because you're going to lose them. But if you do it, what can you do in terms of trying to mitigate some of the risk of promoting someone into a bigger job when you're not really ready? So let me quickly walk through the 5 and try and tease out what I see are paradoxes. And we call it practicing paradoxes simply because some of these concepts are probably not so intuitive. The first one is probably something that we all know. In order to learn best, you need to do it. So we talk about stretch jobs, putting people in an area of discomfort that stretches them. But very often when companies do that, we also don't give them a live rig. So they sink or they swim. And the problem is when they sink, you've wasted a lot of resources. You waste a lot of time. Basically, one you have potential is just not functioning. So what we hear from these companies that we spoke to is, yes, stretch them, move them into jobs when they're 60–70% ready. We don't have a choice because of the high growth we're seeing in Asia. But at the same time, provide good support resources, whether you call it coaching, mentoring, and then a host of other support resources we can put around the individual that we put into a stretch job. The second point is very interesting for us when we dive further into the interviews. Now here we're talking about fast-track development. We're talking about high growth in India and China and parts of Asia. But when we ask the leaders, what has really helped you accelerate your own development? It's about slowing down. I think in the session Peter, I attended just before lunch, a couple of speakers talked about taking time out for reflection. I think increasingly, all senior executives feel that they're on a treadmill. They're running just to stay still. A quote which I really like, which one of the CEOs talked about is, and he says, it's important for me to work on the business, not in the business. You notice the difference? If you work in the business, you're caught up into day-to-day 24/7 activities. How many of us as senior executives actually take time out to work on the business and really look at the overview, where it's heading, what's working, and so on? So then we ask CEOs, what do you mean slow down? Are you saying take 3 months sabbatical and go off to the mountains to meditate? Simple, practical solutions they gave us was yoga, meditation. And CEO said, in my diary, I tell my secretary, every 1 week I have a slot that I put there, meeting with myself. It's literally planning for time out, because if you don't plan for time out, you'll never have time out. Another interesting example that we said was, I have declined promotions before. So you think about this, some of these actually runs counter to moving up the career. Because what we're seeing in Asia, again going back to the economic drivers, is people are being moved into different jobs and bigger jobs in a very short time. They're not learning. So the question for us is it quality of experience or quantity of experience? And what the senior leaders who had made it to the top said was, at that time when I declined my promotion, I stayed on that job. I saw my initiatives come to fruition, and I benefited so much more. I learned so much more from that stint. If I had to cut short the stint to take on a bigger role back at HQ, I would have missed out on the opportunity. So again, something for us to think about is time out, reflection. How do you help executives actually think about the business rather than deal with day-to-day issues, which by default many of us do. Now, task and relationships, again, you would say they're diametrically opposite, but can you combine the two? Particularly in many parts of Asia, for those of you who have traveled and worked there, you appreciate that relationships is quite different. business relationship is quite different from the mature markets like North America, Europe, or in Australia, New Zealand. In many of these mature Western markets, I don't need to like you. We sit at the table, we have this 10 points we negotiate on. I think it makes great sense. We sign the dotted line, and maybe let's get off to the bar for a drink. If you worked in Japan, you worked in India, China, Indonesia, Korea, you probably have to drink lots of sake, go to karaoke, wine, dine, and you never talk about business. But if you're coming in from the US, I kept saying US, I don't know that any Americans do it. You probably don't appreciate the need to do this. So why can't we get to a contract discussion? That's not how business work in many parts of Asia. And the interesting thing when the leaders talked to us was, one of them said, when I go into the market, when I was based in China for years, when I meet a government official, that's part of the relationship, I do not hope to get any payback within months, even years. A lot of this is long-term relationship building. What we are hearing is in many parts of Asia, the local firms that you deal with want to see that you are actually in there for the long haul, not just there to make money and run. And so relationships takes on a whole new dimension in different parts of Asia. But again, going back to all of us, we go into a different market with different lens. There have been many examples we hear that, M&A negotiation teams come into a different market. And so they book the flight in, we stay on the ground for 48 hours, negotiate a deal, and they're out. But to the Japanese, to the Koreans, to the Chinese, I don't even know you. How do I sign on the dotted line? So these are all the stories that keep coming up in different parts. And again, back to the point, if you really want to build your business and expand in Asia, these are probably things that you need to dig a lot deeper into to be successful. Success and failure, the fourth point was very interesting. We asked these top leaders, what has gotten you to where you are? And many of them said, I learned a lot through the times that I was not successful in my career. There was also a parallel study by one of the large global executive search firms, I think it's in Tanzania. And they asked global CEOs, what was your biggest regret? And the most common response was, I wish I had failed more when I was younger. Because the more senior you are, the more expensive your failure is. And ego sets in, hubris sets in, and you kind of live in your own ivory tower. Then the question comes in for all of us running businesses, how do you build a culture where people learn from failure? So just to be clear, we're not encouraging people to fail. But I think over the last few days I've heard other speakers and also the minister talked about encouraging innovation. How do you create a culture where your people, your staff, your colleagues are open to innovation, to new ideas? I've had 3 years experience working in family-owned business, entrepreneurs who have made billions of dollars, huge corporate. But being family-owned, being founder, entrepreneur, I know it all, right? I made my money, I know everything. And that's where hubris sets in. So if we talk about creating a culture of innovation, there's no fear of failure, I think it has to start. One of the CEOs told us he would open his management meeting every year, first by saying what he did wrong last week and what he learned. Now, unless you have that sort of openness, it's obviously not easy to say, failures are tolerated, as long as you learn from it, doesn't matter if you cost a company to lose X million dollars. So the key point here is, what the top leaders are telling us is, we try and build a culture in the company where new ideas are encouraged. If you think it's good, go try it out. If you lose money, that's fine, as long as we all learn from it. Easier said than done. Probably the last point, to some extent, is linked to that. This whole thing about humility. And maybe this is where some of the Asian starts to set in. Because humility is probably not a word that your North American CEOs would talk about. It's all about me, myself, and how great I am. But if you think about business environment, especially in Asia today, high growth, uncertainty, volatility, I think the CEO who thinks he or she knows everything probably the beginning. And so what the top leaders are saying is, humility is part of what I truly believe in. What does humility translate to us? And they're saying, I learn as much from my direct reports, from my partners, from my suppliers, from my most junior person in the office as much as I do from my mentors. So to have that sort of mindset where you don't have all the answers, to have a mindset where you're always soliciting constant learning, it's a very different mindset from I'm CEO, I make decisions, I know everything. So this is just one of the many pieces of work that we did in the Institute before I came over here. I just wanted to share that with you. And if we take a step back to why are we talking about leadership in Asia today, it goes back to, like I said, the economic drivers. For all of us who, I believe, want to succeed in Asia, it's important to understand market dynamics, the people, the local workforce, what drives them, what motivates them, and appreciating that they look at things from a totally different lens from where you and I look at things. But if we continue to look at leadership through what General Electric or IBM or all those big famous US companies consider effective leadership and execute and implement the same way in different parts of Asia, I don't think we'll be that successful. So let me leave you with that. We have a couple of minutes for questions, and I'm happy to maybe expand on some of these things.
Just wondering where you'd direct people to if they have more questions after today, obviously.
I have an email, and as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, the whole family relocated here, and I met Peter 6 months ago. And for those of you who may not know, Peter set up kind of leadership search advisory from 10 years ago. 7 years ago. So I think we got really interested in the work that we both are doing. And we're hoping, for me personally, to make a difference to New Zealand. And I'll probably work with New Zealand companies and just help them understand Asia. So that's my email. Drop me a note, happy to catch up with you if you have ways to.
Sure, there's also the hcli.org, which is your
Thank you. If you're interested in a lot of the work that the institute I led, go and Google Human Capital Leadership Institute Singapore. On the website, you'll probably see a lot of this being posted out there.
I was interested in your comments about the Americans. I work in Asia too, and it's been interesting running leadership programs in Asia, and especially in Indonesia and Malaysia, and Thailand a bit, where they still have a desire to have an American qualification. And like your research in Singapore said, doing and challenging, there's one side of them saying what they came back to you about doing and learning and challenging and humility, and yet they still want to have the American university qualification. But when you say, but that's what caused a lot of the problems, why would you learn from a failed model? How do you, they're in a paradox themselves. They say one thing, but the behavior is different.
It's a great question, because I mentioned one of the 3 things that the Institute did, or is doing, is to develop leadership programs for corporates. And the corporate clients are like the mini leaders of the world that we were working with. But to your point, if you go to a senior executive in China and Indonesia and say, I want you to spend 2 weeks on a leadership program, what do you want to do? I want to go to Stanford, I want to go to Harvard.
Sure.
Yeah, because you're exactly right. And until such time that an institute like this or someone else grows in stature with the brand, it's not going to happen overnight. Why today? Because if I have a piece of MBA from one of these global business schools, I could get 20% more pay in the next company. But that's a reality. But if you dig into the sort of programs that some of these big Western American universities do, they're still teaching their own models. Yeah. But the piece of paper carries a lot of weight. I mean, that's a reality we have to deal with. So there's no quick fix to that, I'm afraid, but I think increasingly as what the Institute tries to do, to go deeper into the research space and hopefully tie up with some of the very main academics in Asia. And to the extent, over the last 3 years, we made great connections with universities in India and China, because we believe there's a lot of research that's not being unearthed. I think the research in India stays in India, research in China stays in China, but it's not being shared. So I think what the Institute has been trying to do is really to unearth some of these nuggets of knowledge that we can then package and give back to industry. But it'll be a long time before the leadership program done by a Singapore institute carries the same weight as your Harvard MBA. That's the reality.
I feel so bad.
Any final questions? Well, I'm happy if you drop me an email at some point. We can catch up for coffee. Like I said, I live in Auckland. I'm delighted to be here. Kids are in school. Thank you for your attention.